You want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story? That would be great.
Okay, sure. My name is Melissa Batista. I'm 36 years old. And last year, during 2021, I was battling Hodgkin's lymphoma. I was diagnosed in May, and I finished chemo treatments in November. And so I've been in remission for about, they would consider it, I guess, 2 months now. Um, and to go back in time and to kind of describe how I figured out that I had the lymphoma, I guess I can start there and then kind of go
Mhm.
through the journey a little bit. So I was pregnant with my daughter. She is 10 months old. But while I was pregnant, I had random symptoms that were coming up, and the doctors just assumed it was due to pregnancy. So I was itching all over, itching to the point where I would scratch my skin until I would bleed. Just uncontrollable. And the doctors just thought it was hormones because when someone's pregnant, you get all sorts of crazy things that happen to your body that, you know, anything could be normal during pregnancy, really. So the doctors did, routine blood work, and they kind of looked me over and they were like, "Oh, it's probably your hormones. It'll go away after the baby is born."
Mhm.
Um and so after I had my daughter, so she was born in March, I'm like waiting for the itching to go away. I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to feel better now. And um, it starts getting worse. And I also noticed in my neck area, I had these like really large lumps. So I had a C-section. I thought maybe from the C-section, it was some kind of like, weird inflammation in my lymph nodes. So this is about 3 or 4 weeks after I had the baby. I'm like, something's wrong. I'm not really sure what's going on. I was trying to ignore it, just thinking it would maybe go away, and it wasn't. And so I think it was the beginning of May. There was one night I was scratching my face and just like I couldn't take the itch anymore. My husband took me to the emergency room, and I thought, all right, they'll probably just give me like a shot of Benadryl and send me on my way. I'll try and follow up with a regular doctor. I go to the emergency room, and the doctor felt the lumps and looked at me, and he's like, "You know what? I'm going to send you for a CT scan." I'm like, "Okay, why is he sending me for a CT scan?" Sure, whatever you want to do, it's fine with me. Um, I get back to the waiting room in the ER, and the doctor comes in, and he's got a look on his face, and you can tell like he's going to have bad news because, he just had that look to him. And he says, "We found masses all throughout your body, and we suspect it might be lymphoma, but you're going to have to go follow up with a cancer center." And so, I'm like, "What?" It was shocking. I couldn't really understand what was going on at the time. He's talking, but I'm not really like digesting any of the information. So I followed up with, um, and wound up going to Sloan Kettering in New Jersey here, where I live,
Mhm.
and they confirmed that it was Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it was already at stage 3 by the time we caught it. So that's that's how that happened. And so that's
Um,
like the beginning of it where, I had just kind of, figured out what was going on.
just to kind of put things into perspective, how old were you when you figured out that like when you went to that initial doctor's appointment?
So I was 35.
Mhm.
Um, And then after my diagnosis, like about a month later, I turned 36. So it was like
Okay.
kind of the end of 35, beginning of 36.
Mhm.
I get to the cancer center. I meet with a doctor who was going to do a biopsy. I had never had surgery or anything like that before. I mean, I had the C-section, but I know that's something like routine. And, I guess I wasn't so nervous about that because I was excited for the baby. But, to hear like you're getting a biopsy is a little nerve wracking. So, I had that done, and they were able to now determine the specific type of lymphoma, and like what I didn't know and I learned is that there's just so many different subtypes. So it's Hodgkin's lymphoma, and now there's subcategories of it. So they were able to kind of like zone in on the specific type, and they said, okay, you're starting chemo right away. Like, we're going to nip this in the butt. It is curable, but we have to be aggressive about it. So I think it was like maybe, 2 or 3 weeks after the biopsy, they were going to start my chemo treatments. Another time in my life where it's like, what to expect. The doctor tells you what's going to happen, but everyone's body is different. So any kind of reactions that you're going to have, you just kind of get that through experience. When they first told me I was going to get the chemo, they said, it's going to be a cocktail of A, B, V, D. Those are the 4 drugs that you're going to be getting, the first letter of each one. And they give me a booklet of all the different side effects that could happen and information about the drugs. To be honest with you, I never even read those because I didn't want to drive myself crazy and like kind of in a subconscious way give myself side effects just from reading the literature. So I just kind of like put that to the side, and I was like, let me just see what happens. So I started getting the chemo infusions, and it's not fun. I'm going to be honest with you. However, I was pretty lucky in the sense that my side effects weren't as bad as what other people were experiencing, and the only reason I know that is from that Facebook support group that you had posted on. Some people were getting like really, really just horrible things happening to them. And I did get side effects, but it wasn't as bad as I guess what I saw other people were experiencing. So I did get fatigue. I would get nauseous. I was getting brain fog. I was losing my taste, losing my smell, things like that. But I was able to function, and I actually continued to work throughout my entire, time I was on chemo and take care of a newborn. Like the other things that were going on in my life probably just kept me going, and I was focusing on the baby and focusing on work. So I was kind of like maybe ignoring the fact that, I was sick and just kind of pushing through and going through life. I had to do 12 sessions total of chemo. So every other week. So it was, I would feel okay and then get a chemo session and then go downhill for a week and then start feeling better and then get another chemo session. And so it was up and down like that for how many months? 6 months that I had to go through that process. After the first 4 chemo treatments, they actually eliminated one of the chemo drugs because my body was reacting well, and they said I didn't need the second one, which is the B drug, which was really great because that can cause long-term heart damage and lung damage. So it was really great that they took that out. And of course, that was probably causing some side effects and whatnot. So other than the potential to give me any of those, problems with my heart and lungs. So then I was on A, V, and D for the remainder of the time I was doing the chemo. Around the 5th or 6th treatment, Originally the chemo was going directly into my veins. The chemo started kind of just destroying all my veins to the point where the nurses couldn't really find the veins, or they were just blowing out and they couldn't really like get a good vein to inject the chemo into. So I wound up having surgery to get a Metaport put in. And I kind of wish I had done that from the beginning. The Metaport is just kind of here in my chest. And when I go for any kind of sessions or any, blood work, they just take a little needle, they poke it right in. Or when they were doing the chemo, it was just a one-time poke instead of them trying to find veins all over. So I kind of would advocate that if anyone does get lymphoma, that they get the Metaport from the beginning and not have to deal with the pain of being injected like 16 times in veins throughout your arms. And it wasn't pleasant. So I would definitely tell people to get a Metaport. So I finished my sessions, and then in November I had my final PET scan, and so the doctor said that I am technically in remission. But I have to get another CT scan done in March, and then another one done, I believe, in like June or July. And they're going to keep following up to make sure that there's no more, spots showing up. And if there are, then they will be on top of it to kind of, I guess, give me any kind of treatments to nip that in the bud. However, more recently, last Wednesday, I wound up having to go for a monoclonal antibodies treatment because I contracted COVID. My daughter picked it up in daycare. That was a little scary because I wasn't able to get vaccinated. The oncologist said to wait about 6 months after chemo for me to get the vaccine. So when I got COVID, I was like, oh no, what's going to happen? I know people are winding up in the hospital. So they sent me for the antibodies treatment, and I'm doing okay right now, knock on wood. And yeah, that's what's going on more recently.
Thank God that you don't have like any bad symptoms and stuff. And how aware of lymphoma were you before your diagnosis?
I always hear of like people saying, breast cancer and other kinds of cancers, thyroid cancer. I really didn't know anything about it, to be honest with you. I've probably more heard about leukemia than lymphoma in the past. I never really heard of anyone having it. Nobody in my family had it or anything like that. So I really had no prior knowledge of it.
And when you were diagnosed, like, where do you find more information about lymphoma or Hodgkin's lymphoma?
I did join the support group on Facebook. A lot of people were sharing their journeys on there, and kind of, as people joined and they introduced themselves, other people were, kind of giving them a heads up or giving them advice. I was trying to mostly listen to the doctor, but I'm not going to lie. Of course, I went on like Google and started searching and looking up information. Mm-hmm. But, when you do that, you're going to find too much information and some things that may not apply to you. So, I thought like, oh, am I going to have to do like radiation? I didn't have to do anything like that. But of course, like that comes up when you do searches. Some people do need radiation treatments and things like that. So I guess like listening to the doctor is probably the best thing to do. But of course, because of human nature and our ability to search things online, we all do that. So of course I did that a little bit as well.
So if you had to share like one really important thing that you learned throughout this process, just to the listeners, just about lymphoma in general, what would it be?
Not to ignore any kind of symptoms, any kind of lumps in your body. If something looks strange, get it checked out right away. I guess for me, it's probably better that I figured it out after I had my daughter, just because I would have been worried throughout the whole pregnancy, knowing I had cancer, you know what I mean? But I feel like in any situation, just like an itch or a lump or anything like that is not normal, and to kind of also advocate for yourself, because sometimes doctors don't really investigate further. I saw a lot of people in the support group, they weren't diagnosed right away because their doctor didn't really send them for further testing. So to just really like advocate for yourself and look into it, and if something doesn't feel right in your body, to just keep pushing and looking further into it to make sure that it's not something like a cancer or anything like that.
Yeah. So were there any programs or services offered that really like helped with the treatment process? Like, did your doctors have support groups they recommended, or did you find them on your own through Facebook?
Yeah, I mostly found people on my own through Facebook. And from what I've been told, a lot of the cancer centers used to have more groups, but because of COVID, they couldn't really have things that were in person. So I think it's just timing. I think they used to have like activities and things where people could get together and kind of meet up, and then they had to do away with that. So I think it was just more the timing, if anything, that they didn't really have that. But I think they did offer counseling if I needed it.
And then you kind of touched on this, but what advice would you give to someone and younger people who like don't know a lot about lymphoma, to like bring awareness about their health and like how to advocate for themselves with like their medical doctor?
I think it's a good idea to join a support group and just like kind of like find people to like ask questions to. There were a few people that I met through the Facebook group that I kind of like, befriended on Facebook, and then would talk to once in a while and say like, hey, did you get this from the chemo, or did you, like experience that? And then they would validate, that was normal, or that they were going through something similar. So I think, having that support is really important. Make sure that you're communicating with your doctor. So while you're doing the chemo, any symptoms that come up or anything, I had an online portal, so I was able to message my doctor, and if she didn't call me back, a research nurse or someone would call me back. But I think communication is important, because if you don't tell the doctor what's going on and you are experiencing something that's not normal from the chemo, the doctor can't read your mind. They don't know. So you really need to just like communicate. When you go to the doctor, have a notepad of questions that come up, because when you go to these appointments, you're overwhelmed. You don't remember things. So just have like a cheat sheet with you of questions that come up in between your sessions, so that you can ask them when you do go for an appointment. I realized that, like while I'm home and something would come into my head, I had to write it down. The brain fog would get really bad. So sometimes like I felt like my head was in a cloud. So I think, writing things down definitely would help, or, maybe putting it in your phone, I guess, if that's your habit, to just remember things that are important to ask the doctor.
Yeah, so you sort of touched on this briefly a little bit earlier, but we were curious about how COVID-19 sort of affected your experience since you were diagnosed right in the midst of the pandemic. And just sort of, I know we had so many changes happening as like a country during that time. So like, just, I know regulations must have changed for you along the way. So we were just curious about that.
Yeah, sure. And even before that, now imagine I was pregnant during the pandemic too. So that affected like the way that the treatment was, when I would go to my weekly appointments to check on the baby. My husband couldn't go with me. It was very scary, thinking like I could get COVID and I'm pregnant. How could that affect the baby? So that was like even before, the cancer journey. There was this constant emphasis on, okay, what if I get COVID? What if I get COVID? Because I couldn't get vaccinated. So my family was worried to be around me. Nobody wanted to get me sick. I was worried about going to any stores, any supermarkets. You get like paranoid, because not just winding up in the hospital, but I was like, oh, I don't want to delay any chemo treatments, because if I got sick, obviously, like it could have delayed the whole thing. So then going to my appointments, I would be chemo day would typically take about 5 hours. So when I would get to the cancer center until I would leave would probably be about 5 hours, maybe even more, because the you would get there, you have to wait to see the doctor, you have to wait to get blood work, and then you would go in for the infusion. The infusion would take like, maybe about 2 hours. So it was just a long day. But having to wear a mask the whole time, that's not comfortable, obviously. I think just a lot of worry that is associated with COVID was just amplified because I was already sick and now not wanting to, become more sick or to delay any of my treatments and things like that. I guess that would be the best summary of it.
And I remember you said that you were diagnosed when you were pregnant. How that worked out? Like, how was that treated?
Yeah, so she actually, and the doctor said, for lymphoma, it doesn't affect the baby at all. So she is fine. She's very healthy. She doesn't have anything from it at all. The doctor said it wouldn't affect her. So, I mean, obviously, I keep an eye on her just to make sure. But the doctor said shouldn't, if anything, they don't really consider it too much of something that's like inherited. She could maybe be a little bit more likely to get it, but it doesn't seem to run in families. It's not like some cancers where like, oh, mom had it, grandma had it, so I'm gonna have it. It's not really like that, luckily.
Okay.
And just kind of like wrapping up, I guess, like, is there any messages or like advice? And I know you had kind of given advice to just younger people in general on being aware of their health and lymphoma, but for other people that are your age that might be like scared to kind of do that initial step of getting diagnosed, or I know that when you were pregnant, you kind of said that it was pregnancy symptoms. And so people going through similar situations where it might take a little longer to get that diagnosis, I guess, like, is there advice for like how you fought through that and how other people like your age should kind of go through with that as well?
Yeah. I think if I were to go back in time, I probably would have dug deeper and had the doctors run more tests while I was pregnant, and probably would have maybe figured out that there was something off earlier, and then I would have started chemo sooner. So I think, just kind of like, not really taking the doctor's word for it, but to investigate further or find another doctor if need be. Another piece of advice that I would give, I know for especially being a woman, it wasn't easy to deal with the whole, being bald, losing my hair, part of it. But, hair is going to grow back, as difficult as it sounds, having gone through it. And in fact, my hair now is kind of like a different texture. It's softer, and my hair used to be curly. It's coming in kind of straight. So if anything, it might be kind of exciting to just have a new version of you at the end. But as scary as it is, it's part of the process, and you just kind of have to go through it. And lymphoma is curable. I know some people's journey is different from mine, and maybe they have longer amounts of treatments, or they wind up having radiation and things like that. But to just keep that in mind, that it is curable, just to keep pushing through, because at the end of the day, positive mindset and positive energy will help push you along and hopefully make you better faster. And I really think that the fact that I was working and the fact that I had the baby, I wasn't home just dwelling and thinking in a negative way. I was just kind of going about my day and trying to live like as normally as possible. And I feel like that made the difference. If I was just laying in bed and dwelling and feeling bad about myself and bad about my situation, I think that definitely would have impacted the situation and, made it 10 times worse for me. So to just kind of like try and think as positively as possible and to keep going and to live your life.